a woman who is a fish processor, and she's hard at work with her child here. She's filleting fish, and she's getting ready to either sun dry or smoke. And in terms of demographics, as we talked about, we had oversampled males. So we had, it was predominantly female population. And for 18 to 29-year-olds, we were really looking for that group of women because that is a very important group for USA. Their range of ages for youth is 15 to 29, so it's a broad gap, but one of the focuses is to try to reach out to youth and empower youth and find out, you know, what youth need. So almost everyone in our sample was married. About 62% identified as Tonga, and about 30% had 3 to 6 years of schooling with a mean of 6 years. But it's important to note that of these 12% that had no schooling or up to 2 years of schooling, most of those had no schooling. And I'm going to be very interested in looking at this in terms of gender, because usually it's women who were not educated as young children. So in terms of head of household, this is an important designation, and this is who is the key decision maker in the household. If you're familiar with the Women's Empowerment in Ag Index, you'll know about this. And basically it's who gets to make the key decisions for the household. Is that a husband? Is that a wife? Or is that a widow or widower? Or is that a joint husband and wife dyad? And so what we found that women and men identified, almost 60% identified that the key decision makers was a husband and wife dyad. So that was actually very good news, because that means that women are more fully empowered. But then again, on the flip side of that, we had over 30% say that a male was the key decision maker in that household. So basically that person makes the rules for the family and decides on how income is spent. So you know that this is very important, that we're having men and female dyads, so these joint decision makers of husbands and wives. So household size ranged from 2 to 6. And with a mean of 6, and that was for the majority participants. And as I said earlier, they also noted that most people said that they ate 3 meals a day. So for Hungry Event 1, with our preliminary results, this is how often did you or other household members miss a regular meal due to lack of resources to get food. For you can see here that about 25% reported occasional hunger, and moderate hunger, and 4% reported severe hunger. And then for other household members, it was pretty much the same. It was about 25% reported occasional hunger, a little bit less for moderate hunger, and then about the same for severe hunger. For Hunger Event 2, how often was there no food to eat in your dwelling due to lack of resources to get food? And by lack of resources, this means even having something to barter for food, even if you don't have cash income for food. So we had, again, 22% reported occasional hunger, 12%, over 12% reported moderate hunger, and about 2% reported severe hunger. For Hunger Event 3, how often did you or another household member go to sleep at night hungry because there was not enough food? And so again, it's a kind of trending in the same way. We have about 20% with occasional hunger, 12% with moderate hunger, and 1% with severe hunger. And in terms of other household members, it really mirrors the same results. So for Hunger Event 4, how often did you or other household member go a whole day and night without eating because there was not enough food? We had 8% for occasional hunger, about 4% for moderate hunger, and about 1% for severe hunger. So this is the most severe form of these hunger events, and we're getting the lower results here, which is actually trending in the way that we had hoped that it would. So in terms of other household members, again, it almost mirrors the results. We had 7% for occasional hunger, 4% for moderate hunger, and around 1% for severe hunger. So here is Dr. Netsai Mudeji. She is my Zambian PI, and she is interviewing a woman killed in 2020. So in terms of results recap, so in terms of household hunger event 1, and that was if you missed a regular meal, 52% of individuals experience occasional, moderate, and severe hunger. So when you add all of those percentages up, they're experiencing some sort of hunger event. And in terms of household members, about 45%. So for hunger event 2, there was no food in your dwelling. 37% of households experienced this occasional, moderate, or severe hunger. For hunger event 3, you went to sleep at night hungry. 35% of individuals reported occasional, moderate, or severe hunger, and 31% of household members, individuals reported that other household members experienced occasional, moderate, or severe hunger. And for a hunger event 4, again, the most severe, you went a whole day and night without eating, and 13% of respondents reported experiencing occasional, moderate, or severe hunger for this hunger event, and 11% of other household members experienced occasional, moderate, or severe hunger. So what the Household Hunger Scale 2 does is it allows researchers to separately measure hunger events at both the individual and household levels. And because it's brief and it's easy to score, and it's also been validated cross-culturally, gives this some good oomph behind this data. So that is a fisher word, oomph, and I don't really know how to spell it, but we can Google it later. So in the next step on this research, we're going to disaggregate the data by gender to compare responses, concordance across husband and wife dyads, thank you, and how men and women's responses differ across households, villages, and communities. And doing gender disaggregated data, like conducting this and looking at the data this way, can provide a more complete picture of food insecurity. And why is tracking gender differences in food insecurity so critical? And this is because we know that women and girls are disproportionately impacted by unequal distribution of food in households, and especially in times of food insecurity. So here's a quick example of this. In 2018, 18 million more women than men were food insecure. And if in this little graphic, if this little block, each woman here represents 1 million women, this is 18 million women. And this again is it for 2018. Now in 2021, only a few years later, 150 million more women were food insecure as compared to men. And again, looking at this, 2018 is 18 million, 2021, 150 million. So this percentage change is 733% in just 3 years. And this is attributed by the experts to climate, to COVID, and to conflict. So this is what this looks like if we're then looking at these women. So I want to thank you guys for your time, and I appreciate it getting to talk to you today. Here are my references, and here are all the acknowledgements, and that's the fine print. So thank you very much.
So good morning, everyone. I want to reiterate my appreciation for you showing up for our session and give a special call out to my boss who has surprised me by showing up, the Dean of the Brown School, Dean of Public Health at the Brown School. Anybody interested in an MPH or a doctoral degree, talk to Rodrigo Rice in the back, and then my other colleague, Dr. Salva, who showed up, so thank you so much. The emphasis of my presentation will be more on the sort of sustainable fisheries and human child growth and human nutrition. I'm Lora Iannotti, and I have no relationships to disclose. So what I'd like to do in this short 15 minutes is cover the following. In the introduction, I'll talk to you about the problem of hidden hunger or nutrient deficiencies more broadly, and how animal source foods and fish in particular can fill that gap. Mention just briefly the vulnerability with smallholders, in particular small-scale fisheries and aquaculture. In the second part of the presentation, I will present to you Samaki Salama, our research in Kenya, starting first with our formative research and the findings from that, and then some very early preliminary findings from Samaki Salama itself, and then conclude with some new paradigms that we're thinking about with my E3 Nutrition Lab with regards to nutrition and sustainability and planetary health, and finish with a policy mention of a report we're working on. So first of all, fish is a very important source of bioavailable nutrients, and those nutrients happen to be aligned with the nutrients that are deficient in many populations around the world. So as Kathleen just mentioned, stunted growth, which is related to poverty and infectious disease, but also these nutrient deficiencies, affects 150 million children around the world. A third of all children are vitamin A deficient, 18% are anemic, which in part is related to iron deficiency, 28% of the world's population are iodine deficient, and then nearly a fifth of the world is zinc deficient. And you'll hear a little bit more about that from Dr. Bree, who will talk to you about iron and zinc. So one thing that our lab has been focused on more recently is not just how these nutrients affect child growth, but how they affect brain development. Again, same nutrients that we find concentrated bioavailable in fish are the ones that are affecting fetal young child brain development. We call them brain selective nutrients, and these include iodine, iron, zinc, copper, selenium, DHA, choline, which is important for cell membrane integrity, but for neurotransmission in particular. And what we see with deficiencies in these nutrients are compromises to the hippocampus, which is important for learning and memory. We also see the compromised functional outcomes in child development. There are vast differences in the level of consumption of fish and other animal source foods around the world. And this has implications for population health. And we can see, we have an analysis that we published recently that shows the proportion of nutrients, the level of these important nutrients that come from fish. And you can see in particular DHA, which is the long chain fatty acid in the brain, important for brain development, is provided by fish at very high levels. You can see that. But then there are these disparities from around the world as well. Elin, you're keeping track of my time. As I mentioned before, one of the things that we're focused on in the USAID Feed the Future Fish Innovation Lab is the vulnerabilities of smallholder producers. And this is true for aquaculture and also for fisheries. And you'll see in the coastal research that we're doing in Kenya that these households are particularly vulnerable. And this is because of poverty, because of food insecurity. And yet, they produce approximately 80% of the food that is consumed in developing countries. And there were estimates that somewhere between 50 and 77% of nutrients are coming from these small-scale food producers. So there's an obligation, but also a very important imperative to focus on these producers. So moving now to Samaki Salama and the Kenya context, we see along the coast a very high level of stunting, as Kathleen mentioned. So 40%, nearly 40% of children under 5 are affected by stunting. We also are seeing very high levels of diarrhea. And this is related to malnutrition because of the influence on the enteric gut health. And this is something that we're paying attention to in Samaki Salama. So one of the really brilliant processes, I think, that the Fish Innovation Lab followed was to fund some quick starts, 1-year formative research, in order for us to better design our research for the larger scale projects. And what we found in Kenya is that there were differences between fishing and non-fishing households in terms of nutrition, but also access to fish. We also explored some of the behaviors and preferences in young children to see what was going on in terms of their attitude towards fish consumption. What we found is what they're giving to these young children, despite being fishing community, not very much fish, and they're giving it in the form of fish soup, which is essentially a broth. It has very little, this picture is actually not very representative of the kind of fish soup that they're giving. So these small children with very small gastric capacity, they're filling up on a broth, and they're not getting the nutrients that they need. As a result of this formative research, we then designed the Samaki Salama project. And this is a cluster randomized controlled trial with 3 different groups: control group, a social marketing for nutrition behavior change group, and then what we're doing is what we call nutrition sensitive intervention, where we're adding not only the social marketing for behavior change, but modified fishing traps to address the poverty concern and to increase yield of sustainable fisheries. This is a efficacy trial that's 12 months, and I think that's another kind of benefit that we have, that it's a long duration intervention. You can see the trap on the right has an escape valve for juvenile fish, and this is again in view of trying to target sustainable fisheries and allow the small fish to escape and just catch the adult fish. We're also encouraging consumption of tafi, which is a fish at lower trophic level, which will again lead to a more sustainable fisheries ecosystem, marine ecosystem. These are the sites along coastal Kenya. You can see 2 communities are intervention. It includes the full intervention, social marketing and traps. 2 sites are control and 2 sites is just social marketing. Here's a couple of images from the social marketing intervention, which is a multi-tiered sort of approach. We're targeting households and going into households to use sort of dialogue, behavior change strategy, as well as a range of different materials that have been developed and designed coming from communities actually to ensure that there's receptivity. We're also using cooking demonstrations, and after some time doing this with the caregiver, the female caregivers, the fishers were asking for some fishing demonstrations too, so they started participating, and fisher workshops. And here's a Star Foods game. Modified traps with the escape door. So I am not going to present officially the findings from the nutrition, because those analyses are very early on, but what I will reveal to you is that it seems as if we may have some differences in the social marketing and the social marketing plus the trap. So that extra effort to address poverty and to address yield and production may be making a difference. But again, I want to caution myself in not revealing too much on that. But what we are seeing, which is rather exciting, revealed in this image here, is increases in yield, clearly, and increases in some of those indicators that point to sustainability. So the length of the fish are longer, they're bigger, they're more adult in the intervention. And then as well, in the abundance or the catch per unit yield effort, which is a proxy for abundance. So that's exciting. This is our strategy that we continue to promote, which is long fish, long children. We want tall children and we want big fish. Okay, so moving now to the conclusions. I'll just introduce a few ideas, again, that relate to the sustainable approach to human nutrition and food security. An idea that we're working on quite a bit within the Fish Innovation Lab, but also at Washington University right now, where we are thinking hard about how do we really pivot towards environmental research. And Dr. Rice is part of that effort in planetary health. So this is one of the paradigms that we're thinking about, is sort of food systems in harmony with ecosystems. How do we return Homo sapiens to our proper place within ecosystems? How do we integrate food systems with healthy ecosystems? And thinking about sort of nourishing biomes is another paradigm that we've been talking about. And then linking, because they have been shown to be linked in the literature, biodiversity with diet diversity. So sadly, 60% of the calories that we consume on this planet come from 3 plants. This is really a depressing statistic, I think. Rice, maize, and wheat, and that's having huge implications on our human health, but it's also having effects on our environmental health. This is also true for animals and for fish. There's dwindling breeds that we're using. Some researchers have started to show that when we start to integrate these indicators into human nutrition use, there can be benefits on both sides. So let me just conclude with a couple of policy papers that our lab was involved with and that others from the Fish Innovation Lab and from the Fisheries Network have been involved with at FAO. And these 2 policy papers. One was livestock-derived foods and sustainable healthy diets, and the other one was the role of aquatic foods in sustainable healthy diets. The one for terrestrial animal source foods has now blossomed into an enormous FAO project where they're writing 4 different papers to show the importance of animal source foods for human health, but as well in, how do we do this in sustainable ways? We know that nutrition inequities prevail around the world, but we also know that animal source foods are critical in terms of certain nutrients. As I said, for child growth and brain development. And we need to consider this across the life course, not just among adults, but in children as well as aging older adults, where they're showing increasingly the importance of fish and animal source foods. So again, to conclude, we need to rebalance our food systems, support sustainable mixed production systems, and safeguard human, animal, and planetary health. With that, I close with acknowledgments to my colleagues, super colleagues at URI, at Pwani University, Egerton University in Kenya, and another thanks to the Feed the Future Fish Innovation Lab. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Terezie Tolar-Peterson, and thank you very much for coming and learn about our projects. So our project is called Nourishing Nations, Improving Nutrition and Food Safety Knowledge of Small-Scale Fish Processors in Delta State, Nigeria. And this project has 3 objectives. Develop cost per nutrient guidelines by analyzing the nutrient and contaminant profile of selected processed fish products and their respective prices in comparison to other animal source food available in Delta State. Build capacity, and that objectives is being completed as of now. And the other objectives is build capacity among women and youth fish processors in Delta State to produce quality, safe, and nutritious processed fish products for local consumption. That objective is ongoing. And what I'm gonna talk about today is the 3rd objective, to educate women and youth fish processors in Delta State about benefits of fish in human diet and develop low literacy tools to help them better market their products. So this is the content of the presentation, a little bit background, and then I'm going to talk about development of the program, implementation, and evaluation. So we already heard from Dr. Iannotti about the importance of fish for its nutrition value in our diet. So of course it contains all the essential amino acids, fatty acids, vitamins, minerals. But on the other side, fish is very prone to spoilage and also many times contaminated. And the contamination can happen before the catch, when the fish is still in the water because of the environment is contaminated, and then of course during processing, storage, transportation. And some of the most common contaminants are mercury, microbial pathogens like salmonella, parasites, chemical contaminants like polycystic aromatic hydrocarbons, and biotoxins. So in Nigeria, majority of the catch of the fish is processed by smoking. And in the area where we work, in Delta State, it's 90%. So almost all fish is processed by smoking. And that's exposed the fish to contamination with polycystic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are carcinogenic. And also during the smoking, as you're gonna see in some of the pictures, the women fish processors, most of fish processors are women, they are exposed to the smoke. So if they all day stand in front of the smoking bin, they are exposed to inhaling the smoke. Again, what could affect their health. So here are the traditional smoking kins, cut out rams, and as you see, the dark color of the fish, again, it's add the flavor, the traditional flavor, but also, it adds some of the carcinogens in their diet. Most of the times they use wood for smoking. The other problem what we see is the unhygienic environment, processing environment. So here you see the containers with the water, with fish, where contamination can happen. Also around the smoking area, you see a lot of rubbish which attracts insects and rodents. So that's some of the problems they experience. So fish processors, even that they are overlooked in fish business, they are extremely important for producing safe products in the market. So they can prevent spoilage, they can prevent contamination, improve processing methods, and they also can promote consumption of fish, because most of the fish processors, they also sell the fish in the market. So they have the contact with the other women, and they can help them promote the fish for consumption. So this is the phases of our project, planning and design. That's mostly happen at Mississippi State University with weekly meetings with Calabar University. Implementation in Nigeria, of course, and then again, evaluation mostly at Mississippi State. So during the planning phase, we developed and validated low literacy teaching curriculum for teaching those fish processors about nutrition and food safety and safe processing methods. We also develop learning cues to help them remember what they learned during the training. We also investigate about their current habits and about their current diet, and we test the efficacy of our teaching, and we also been interested if those habits change post-training. So this is the curriculum. It has 7 modules, and we also developed facilitator's guide, which was step-by-step instruction how to involve participants in learning by different games, facilitating discussions, and so make it really fun and interactive for the learner. We validate all of our material. We use the Content Validity Index for validating the curriculum, and we make changes. We validate the objective content, relevance, language, infographics, design, motivation, culture, methodology, and we also validate the pre and post tests. This is the teaching cues. So we develop, this is an apron with a message for fish processors: buy fish, eat fish, stay healthy, thrive. Another cue was these bracelets, which were for children and for fish processors, and also they have the additional bracelets to give to their customers to promote the message of fish consumption. And fans, which they could use during smoking, and again it has had a message about the importance of fish consumption. The training was implemented in 3 different areas in Delta State, and altogether we had 122 participants. There was huge interest in those trainings, so we had to turn some possible participants away. And it was 3-day training. So before the training, we took small group, about 5 of the participants, and we did comprehensibility test with them to make sure that the training is well understood, or the material which we are using is well understood. So we used the PLOSA procedure for that. And the testing, we did pre-test and post-test after each of the module and after each of the module. And of course, as expected, there was significant improvement in knowledge. In some modules, we saw more improvement, in some modules less. And we also look at how they assess their knowledge before the training and then after the training. So we ask them very simple questions, how confident you are about the knowledge in nutrition, in processing, in food safety, and then we ask them the same things after the 3-day training. And they've been very confident before the training and a little bit less confident after the training. So it's just show them that there is more opportunity for learning. And it was received very well, this training. It's really energized them and kind of initiate conversation between fish processors about improvements in some of the techniques. So what we saw was improved knowledge from baseline. We also saw improve in dietary diversity. So we did dietary diversity survey before and 3 months post the training, and we saw increased consumption of fish in the 3 months post evaluation. We didn't saw much other habits modification, and I think that's because there's needs, many times they need resource to change the habits, which we recommend, and we didn't provide those resources. So our research findings are that most fish processors do not have sanitary environments to work. They do not have access to clean water. They do not practice food safety, guidelines like washing hands. 82% rated the fish they buy as a good, but it's losing value during the processing, during the storage, and during the transportation because of pests, because of insect contamination, storage, and outages, electrical outages, for example. 93% didn't have any previous training in fish processing, and 92% didn't have any training in nutrition or food safety. So here we see a huge potential for education of that group. Conclusion, so there is a need for education, definitely, and this, if we focus to educate this group of women or young adults, we can improve their health, their family's health, and also their customers. And this group will definitely benefit from technical training, financial education, and access to credit if we really want to make a difference. So I would like to recognize our group. The PI is Monica Pasqualino. I am the US PI. Henrietta Ene-Obong is the PI in Nigeria. We had Dr. Nunta is our coordinator. We had 3 graduate students. Grace Adegoye, she did a lot of the working on the modules, and she is now assistant teaching professor at Ball State University. And we have 2 master students, Ikene Okere and Joy Estate, still in the program, and also we had administrator staff. So thank you for your attention.
My name is Brietta Oaks, and I have no financial relationships to disclose. So today I'll be talking about the potential nutritional benefits and health risks of oysters in Ghana. Just to give this a bit of context, I'm a nutrition researcher that likes to focus on women's nutrition. This means I tend to get interested in vitamins and minerals that are highly prevalent deficiency in women and have a large negative health impact. While there's a variety of micronutrients that fit that criteria, 2 key ones are zinc and iron. So zinc and iron deficiencies are highly prevalent in West Africa, and they increase the risk of anemia, with iron deficiency estimated to be responsible for approximately half of anemia. Among West African coastal countries, anemia prevalence ranges among women from 35 to 52%. And here I'd like to just bring attention to the image on the right. So this is an image by one of my graduate students doing research in Ghana who took blood samples from 2 different women. The woman on the right is not anemic. The woman on the left has severe anemia. We often define anemia as hemoglobin less than 12 grams per deciliter. But I just wanted to clarify in a very basic way, it means there's less red blood cells. So you can anticipate that the woman on the left is at a much higher risk for a variety of health problems when she's working with a blood that has that low content of red blood cells. If a woman becomes pregnant, we see that anemia is a risk factor for low birth weight and preterm birth. And women with anemia have an 84% increased risk of postpartum hemorrhage, which is a leading cause of maternal death globally. So why focus on oysters? I've been getting very interested in foods that can address the iron and zinc deficiencies we see globally. And when I looked at food tables, oysters were at the top of the list for both iron and zinc. Looking at 1 serving of oysters from the US, it meets 100% of the RDA for zinc and 26% of the RDA for iron. I specify oysters in the US because up until this research, that was the only data I had to work with. So we were measuring the nutrient content of oysters in the US and just assuming it applied everywhere, even though we know that seafood nutrient content can be highly influenced by the environment. The other thing I like about oysters is that while in the US we view them as a high-income food that's often served in fancy restaurants, in Ghana they are actually typically low cost and highly accessible to low-income households in coastal areas. The other thing I'll just mention about oysters that I really like is they're currently in a period of women's empowerment with oysters in Ghana. Oysters historically, harvesting oysters is a woman's profession in coastal communities. The men tend to go out on the fishing boats, leaving the women with the children, but then the women can go and harvest oysters in the low tides, even while taking care of their children. The oyster harvesting sites were showing signs of being over-harvested. So recently the Ghana government gave the rights to the oyster harvesting sites to a women's oyster picking association. So now this women's group now has exclusive rights to the oyster harvesting sites, and they manage the oyster harvesting sites in a sustainable way. So it's very exciting. This is a recent development, and it empowers the women. That said, with oyster harvesting being a more informal manner compared to fishing, it's sometimes described as the invisible fishery. We don't know how many oysters are harvested typically in these countries, the way we count fish. Furthermore, it means that oysters are not supervised and regulated in a similar manner as other seafood, which puts oysters at risk for unchecked contamination. Particular concerns have been raised around heavy metals and other pollutants, which have been documented in some oyster harvesting sites, which are potentially detrimental to human health. The 4 heavy metals of concern that I see for women of reproductive age are mercury, cadmium, lead, and arsenic. So I'll be presenting data on the first 3. Our arsenic data is still being analyzed. So this brings me to the Women Shellfishers and Food Insecurity Project. It's a large project with many collaborators, but the part that my colleague Seth Adeofarawa, pictured in this picture, and I are leading, we collected dietary data from 504 women shellfishers from 3 different sites in Ghana, and we also used we used repeated 24-hour dietary recall to estimate their total iron and zinc intake and oyster consumption. The second part of our project was we collected 915 oysters from these 3 sites and measured mineral and heavy metal concentrations of those oysters. So looking at our data from the women, we did find that 62% of women shellfishers had diets that did not meet the recommended intake for iron and zinc. So these women are at risk for iron and zinc deficiency. Furthermore, our data suggests that oyster consumption is actually very low among these women shellfishers in Ghana. So even though they have diets that are deficient in irons and zinc, and oysters are a great source of these, only 13% of the women reported eating any oysters. Most obviously, this may be due to women choosing to sell the oysters instead of consuming them, but there's possibly other reasons women are choosing not to eat the oysters they harvest, which should be further explored. So now looking at the oysters that we analyzed, there's 2 key takeaways from here. First is just looking at 100 grams of oysters, which is approximately 1 cup. We do find that across the 3 sites, each bar represents a different oyster harvesting site. The oysters are an excellent source of both iron and zinc, with 100 grams of oysters getting either very close or above their RDA from each site. But the other interesting thing here is noticing that if we compare this to 100 grams of US Eastern oysters, which is estimated to have 4.6 milligrams of iron and 39 milligrams of zinc, we see a very different nutrient profile between these 2 groups of oysters. So looking at the oysters from Ghana, we see they have almost double the iron content of US oysters. If we look at the zinc content, we actually see it's much lower. This isn't a concern because, as you can see, it's still very close to the zinc RDA. But this does just confirm the hypothesis that Ghana oysters have a different iron and zinc content than US oysters, and solidifies the message that we really need to be analyzing the seafood within the countries that we're interested in. Looking at the heavy metals in oysters, this is data showing there is reason to be highly concerned. So the first column represents the regulatory limit, and then we've got the 3 different oyster harvesting sites presenting cadmium, lead, and mercury as milligram per kilogram oyster. You can see that the mean estimate of the heavy metals was consistently above the regulatory limit. On an individual oyster level basis, 92 to 100% of the oysters exceeded the regulatory limit, depending on which heavy metal we were looking at. We also calculated a hazard index, which is the cumulative health risk, taking into account all 3 heavy metals there, and also takes into account average daily oyster consumption and average body weight of the women. Anything above 1 indicates a cause of concern, and you can see the hazard index ranges from 26 to 78, with that second site really being influenced by a high mercury level in the oysters. So, moving forward, I would say there's 3 key takeaways from this. Women shellfishers in Ghana do show a need for more iron and zinc in their diet. Given that the oysters had an excellent, or we confirmed they're an excellent source of zinc, and they're actually even a better source of iron than we anticipated, it would be great to be able to promote oysters for consumption to address these deficiencies. But we must address the heavy metal contamination in order to be able to promote these as a source of addressing these nutrient deficiencies as they ought to be promoted. I would just like to acknowledge all the various people that are involved with the Women Shellfishers Food Security Project, especially my colleague Seth Adeofarwa, who is the PI in Ghana on this, and thank you to the Fish Innovation Lab and USAID. All right, thank you.
And thank you so much, and now we'd like to have Elin come up, and I'm going to try now to take over as the technician, which I might not be any good at all. So, let's see.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you so much to the presenters for these really wonderful presentation. It's been very interesting, and my role is as a discussant is just to give a little bit of an overview of what I've heard today, and then to kick off the discussion. So, as Kathleen mentioned in her introductory words, I used to be the Deputy Director for the Fish Innovation Lab. The Fish Innovation Lab is a Feed the Future funded USAID program that is in a cluster of 25 or 26 other innovation labs that you may have heard of. There's a peanut one, a soybean, a post-harvest loss, but all of the innovation labs together, we work to really improve nutrition for vulnerable populations around the world. So all of the innovation labs, including our Fish Innovation Lab, is a competitively sort of funded awards program, basically. So the excellent presentations that you saw today has been the result of these groups, and 2 of them actually had the Quick Start programs that Lora mentioned, and I think that was really, really great because we had it in Zambia and in Kenya. So those Quick Starts were able to get some great findings and then move that into bigger projects. So the Fish Innovation Lab has 3 different outcome areas, and one of them has to do with human outcomes, and that's the area where all of these presentations fit. So within the Fish Innovation Lab, we have something called our research strategy, and for that we try to come up with what are some questions that are running across the different programs that we're funding. And within the human outcomes area, the two common questions that we had is, one, how can we provide more equitable access to high quality fish products among vulnerable groups? And the second one was, if we do increase access, does it result in improved dietary diversity and nutrition among vulnerable groups? So I think that all these excellent projects contributed to that research strategy. So what did I hear this morning during this presentation? Well, it's the two first presentations specifically addressed. You know, we know that food security is really a problem, that many young children are stunted and have deficiencies in zinc, iron, iodine, and so forth. And these are nutrients that are found in fish. We do see in all these countries that low dietary diversity and hunger is pervasive in our study sites. And that nutrition inequalities contribute to hunger and stunting. So I think that's part of what Kathleen found, and I know Lora has looked at too in Kenya, that there is an unequal distribution of food within households, and that hunger impacts women and children disproportionately. So it is critical that we increase household consumption of aquatic foods like fish and shellfish and even seaweed, because they do provide health benefits to women and children. But it's easier said than done, you know, because first of all, fish must be sustainably produced, like Lora and her colleagues are doing in Kenya with the traps. You know, we have to figure out how to increase fish production and the availability of fish at the same time as it needs to be sustainable. The household distribution has to be fair, so that's something that multiple of these projects are looking at, in that everybody in the household needs to be able to eat the fish. The aquatic foods must be affordable and culturally appropriate. So my background is more in managing fish, not so much in managing nutrition. And as fish managers, we look at fish production and we want to just increase the production or make production more sustainable, get more income to fishers. But sometimes, you know, as an aquaculture producer, I might just want to produce high value catfish or tilapia, but that's not the fish that's going to feed the most poor. So I think this is a really good initiative in these projects, is looking at how do we make it affordable and culturally appropriate. Like in Lora's presentation, you're talking about the broth, you know, and that sometimes there was, I know in your research, you got some feedback that people were scared of feeding children fish because they might choke on a bone. So how do we address some of those issues? And my last point is that women have to be enabled to harvest, prepare, and serve products that are free from contaminants. And I think, you know, the last two presenters really brought home that message that fish is very vulnerable to spoilage. And so first of all, how do we prevent the post-harvest losses? How do we prevent fish from spoiling while we process it? And the second thing is, you know, how do we make sure that the fish, when we bring it up from the water? So the sites that Dr. Bree had in Ghana, you know, those are quite urban, in very urban watersheds, and I know there's at least one of them that has like a battery factory upstream. So how do we, you know, that's probably not going to be the place where you want to collect your oysters. So you may need to do some sort of spatial planning where you look at where are places where oysters are safe and where they're not safe, and how can we then promote the oysters that are coming from a safe place. So, so I think this is the end of my little discussion piece. So I wrote down one question that I thought I wanted to ask you guys if you wanted to comment on, and then wanted to open it up for you guys in the audience for your questions. So my question is as follows. Based on your excellent field research, what I'm very proud of as the former deputy director, what do you think are the most promising ways to increase access to and consumption of high quality fish products among women and young children in your study site? So I don't know if maybe we can start with Bree because you're first. And
Sure.
I'm gonna sit down and
Yeah, I think in my perspective from my study, the women have access to the oysters. The key thing is making them safer to eat. So my number one argument would be to address the heavy metal contamination, doing that in collaboration with the Ghanaian government, which I know is currently very interested in efforts around reducing mercury exposure in the country. So I think it's a ripe time to politically address this topic, and that's the number one way I see for Ghana right now.
So in our project, definitely education. So we saw hunger for education about nutrition, to learn more about food safety, to learn more about processing, and that's pretty low cost, to provide education. So I think in our case, it will be to educate women about processing, food safety, and nutrition.
So adding to that, building from that, I would say our experience that the education or the social marketing within the household, as Elin was saying, helps to redirect that in those inter-household allocation to the young children. I think the caregivers, the fishers in particular, were very willing to do that with that awareness. But then the layer that I would add to what Terezie just said is the poverty piece. So what we see is by increasing livelihoods, by increasing by a little bit that production, then they're also more likely to keep some of the fish in the household and give it to the vulnerable women and children in the household.
Thanks, Laura. And so we just finished phase 2 of the Fish First Zambia study. And actually, the Fish First gets its name from the first 1,000 days of life. So fish in that first 1,000 days of life in Zambia. And what we did in this phase 2 was we did sensory panels of some fish-based recipes. So we're calling this product Comfa plus fish, and this is complementary food for Africa, plus dried fish powder. So it's Comfa plus fish. And what we're doing is mixing the dried fish, which is very available, very common food all over sub-Saharan Africa. People eat a lot of dried fish, and this is usually, they're very tiny. They're called small pelagics. And I didn't even know what that was until 2018 when we wrote this grant, and now I know it very well. And these are very, very tiny fish, very nutritious because when they're dried, their nutrients are concentrated. And so they're an excellent source of multivitamins and micro and macronutrients, and lots of really, and also really good flavor. And because they're eaten whole, with that bone, they have the calcium and these other things, and because you're eating the brain, then they have some extra special, and you can tell I'm not a nutrition expert because I wouldn't say extra special nutrients if I was. I need some help on that. So I'm a medical anthropologist and not a nutrition person, but I'm learning a lot on the way. So what we did was we added the Comfa Plus fish products, which is dried fish powder plus whatever is other locally available dried fish product, dried food products like a dried sweet potato or dried pumpkin leaf, and mixed those and then added them to traditional dishes, and then asked mothers and their infants, the infants were 6 to 23 months old. So the infants just tasted the Comfa Plus fish complimentary porridge. So this is maize-based porridge, which is, of course, eaten everywhere across sub-Saharan Africa, but not that rich in nutrients. And so then we fortified it with the comfort plus fish. And I'm telling you, I was there in June and my heart was racing. I was like, what if the babies don't like the complimentary Food for Africa porridge? And they liked it. So I was really psyched about that. And we also had the mothers tasted the comfort plus porridge, because we know mothers are really, they are the vanguard of getting their children fed properly. So, and they also like the porridge. We also had them try Chihuahua Fisashi, which is dried pumpkin leaf based dish. So it's a savory dish that is then made with the dried fish powder and other nutrients, and they love that. And they also really liked the kapinta chutney, which was basically dried fish that's then mixed with spices and onions and all that. It's getting lunchtime and now my tummy's rumbling because that was really good too. The third dish that the fourth dish that they tried was the bean and vegetable soup, and with comfort plus fish added. And really, that one was their least favorite, even though a majority still didn't like it. But it was an issue of texture, and I thought that was very interesting. We're going to go back and see what we can do to adjust that recipe to make it more delicious. And then on the next day of testing, which we did the panel with the children, we also had 2 other dishes for mothers, because we're also trying to encourage micro enterprises. So we had 2 fish-based dishes that women could make to sell. And this was I call it the comfort plus fish biscuit. So it was a more of a savory, like a cookie. So and also the comfort plus fish. I'm sorry, is that my time? Okay. Sorry, I thought that was me. I just forgot the other product. But basically, we have 2 other products for them, so that they can think about like starting these businesses and having these little micro enterprises where they can sell these food products at market. So that's what we did. So yeah, I'll stand here. I've got a big voice. So we'd like to open the floor for any questions. Does anybody have a question for us? Yes, ma'am, and then I'll take her. Okay.
Okay, my question is the question about the one who made the presentation about
Can you speak up just a little bit for us? Oh, or come to the microphone. Yeah.
Yeah. So which regions in Ghana, or which side? We said 3 sides. So what were the sides?
Yes. So the 3 sites, we have the Dentsu. So it's basically, it was sites.
Do you know the regions?
I know what you're talking about, like the specific, the technical.
It's the greater Accra region.
Yes.
Pardon?
The greater Accra region.
So all the 3 sites were in Accra?
Yes, the greater Accra region, yeah.
Very urban.
Yes.
Oh, I am from Ghana, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
Because I did my master's thesis in it was an evaluation work in invisible fishes. And that one was in Volta and Central region. But then it was an anemia intervention about smoke. So you did the Nigeria one. So in fishing, women's smoke processing one. So they did an education. It was a 6-week education thing where they sent, because Ghana and Nigeria is a multi-ethnic thing, so we have different languages. So there's that part, they sent messages on nutritional information, because as you said, they do have access to the fish, but then they will sell it instead of eating it. So it had a part where they gave women improved smoked fish equipment where they could use, and one was giving them economic information about how to invest, and the other part was sending out nutrition, food safety, food hygiene information to them through the phone, because not everybody had the phone. So that was what I did for like 2019. So I wanted to know where yours was. And I lived in Ghana for 28 years. I don't even know that, but I never knew we had oysters there. Because I do see oysters, I watch American movies, like it has this exotic thing. So I was like, there probably will be oysters, but they'll be processed differently and have a different name for it. Like, I've lived in Ghana and I didn't know we had oysters.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you bring that up because that just points out the opportunity that exists for promoting them if once they become more safe to eat.
Yeah, we have an issue about that. And say the government is going to help.
Well, that's everywhere. That's not just Ghana, right? That's all. That's even in the United States. So, did you have a question? Yeah, I want to say also that I do research in Ghana, and what I know is that if people know that oysters are there, they'll start eating them. So that's a.
Yeah.
I mean, they're very adventurous eaters. Yes.
We like to try food.
Try.
We watch it. We know it's an exotic. So if it is, so I'll try and see if I can get the local name and.
Just a comment to add to that. I stole a student away from Ghana, and he's now a PhD candidate at my university. And the one thing he hates in the United States is pizza. He just does not understand why people like pizza. So, but he will eat anything else except pizza.
Thank you for 4 fantastic talks on really important topics and just really thoughtful presentations and clearly thoughtful work. A number of the presentations touched on either methods of processing or the fish themselves in terms of contamination and possible hazards that way. I'm curious if either now or in future work there might be a consideration of microplastics, which we don't really know a whole lot about, but are probably a problem. I don't know how that would interface or even would be a health consideration relative to the potential value of fish.
Yeah, I can just say I'm in preliminary discussions with the other co-investigators on the project, that we have been talking about microplastics being something that we would like to analyze as a next stage to build off this research for sure.
Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, so thank you for the presentations. And I just had one question, because some of you brought it up, so it's to all of you, but essentially, how is it, when you mentioned that oftentimes some of the issues are the locals sometimes will end up kind of selling rather than consuming some of these products that they're creating. But then that's a view, I guess, from sort of the local view. What about some of the government and kind of what their viewpoints are, what their priorities are when it comes to, marketing versus trying to feed the local population, and what did you experience with the sites you worked with?
So I'll answer this question. So my center, the Coastal Resources Center, we do work on these issues around the world, and I would say that the government's goal is usually production. It's just a production related goal, and the fisheries extension people that we work with, I feel are really in tune with the issues of getting more fish to households. So we usually get quite good support for this kind of work.
To Kenya. Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's an important question. And one that's sort of at the crux of our research in Kenya, in these small scale fisher households. And our experience is that yes, I think governments are supportive, and if you're clever about how you do this, you can target the fish that may be of lower value. So for example, in this coastal Kenya, they're selling the octopus or the higher value fish to the tourist industry, and the government of course wants that to flourish. But what we're doing is we're targeting this fish that's of lower value, the toffee, which is also sustainable, and the households are willing to keep some of that. So you have to keep the economics and politics in mind as you do this. It's a good question.
Any other questions? Yes. Are you also from Ghana?
I'm actually from right next door. Well, not next door, but maybe 2 blocks down from Sierra Leone.
Okay, well, here we have a next door neighbor from Burkina Faso.
Burkina Faso, from Sierra Leone, so West Africa, right?
Yeah.
And of course, as you know, Sierra Leone, Freetown is right on the coast, so I grew up eating fish. So it's actually very exciting to see a project like this, a very affordable, cheap source of, food that can eventually help boost the nutrition, right? So it's very exciting to see that. Hopefully one day can do some work in Sierra Leone, that we'll see. Actually, my question that I have is related to the nutrition. Most of you talked about the preparation and also the potential the contamination of course the way food is prepared, and of course the carcinogen in terms of smoking. But my area is actually looking at the social determinant of health. I look at refugee population, but also I do research on infectious diseases and how socioeconomic factors influence even the transmission, the containment and control of diseases. So when you guys were speaking, I was just thinking about if there's any maybe future, maybe there's any collaboration looking at, maybe some of the socioeconomic factors that are influencing the way these families are actually preparing, the way they're preparing their food. Because ultimately, even you can give them all the education that they need, but if you don't try to target those socioeconomic factors, what about the sustainability of the project itself? Right. So maybe this is just me throwing it out there. I'm just curious if there's some discussion in there, or maybe some partnership like the World Bank or other organizations actually working towards that aim to help make this more sustainable, in the future. So that's just my question that I have. Thank you.
For our project, the first objective is actually to develop contamination profile of the food of all the fish and seafood available in the market. So that objective is ongoing, and after that, right now we're finishing it. It's being tested, but after we have that data, we will work on recommendation for what is the best animal source food on the market regarding price and contamination. So I see a lot of potential there, and then of course we can work with other organizations and the government maybe to to really recommend that food for consumption, for safe consumption.
And I love that you brought up the social determinants of health, because we know across sub-Saharan Africa with food issues, one of the big things that I don't remember whose presentation, it might have been Bree's, might have been Tereze's, or it could have been Lora's, I can't remember right now. But when they brought up the fact that there's a lot of fluctuation in the electricity, and I've seen that in the countries where I work, and that is so pivotal to making sure that people from the U.S. say, well, just give them ice machines, but if the ice machine doesn't have any power, it doesn't help anything, right? So these are these very, very embedded socio-political issues that are really kind of the top-down issues that again gets to that government support. And of course we know that many of these developing countries are very strapped for cash, so the issues around electricity is a big one. And one of the ways that we have been working to work with local populations about that is to figure out ways so that when they are processing the foods, when they're drying them, etc., that they're more hygienic in the ways that they can do that. And I know, Terezie, if you can comment on the Nourishing Nations, the project where you have the woman who is the fish processor, if you would, that was such a great resource.
Yeah, so we did couple kind of case studies or success stories with the participants in our training, and one of the women she implemented some of the changes in processing, in smoking, and in storage. So she said that actually now her fish tastes better. It's less burn. She has some customers actually wait for her fish to come to the market because it's better quality, and that's increased her income and livelihood. So, and that was very interesting, and also the discussion between participants in the project, because some participants, they already have better storing procedures, and some didn't. So there was really nice discussion between them to help each other, what they can do to produce longer shelf stable fish, but also better tasting fish and safer. Yeah. So the ultimate goal was to improve their livelihood, to improve their income, improve the livelihood of the family.
And that story, I think, is on the Fish Innovation Lab. If you do, just Google it, Fish Innovation Lab, it'll pop up there with Teresie's name.
Thank you so much for this presentation. So my question has to do with landlocked country in Africa, so the ones that do not have a lot of waters, like in Burkina Faso. I see like Zambia as a landlocked country, but you were able to do some research over there. So in my country, for instance, lately we've been having less and less fish. So I was wondering if you guys have been having some research done with like for fish farmings, or because have you also noticed if you will be getting like the same results in same types of minerals in fish if you were to do some fish farmings, and if there will be some success for those countries that are starting to have less fish.
So we mostly work in coastal countries. We do work in some lake countries like Zambia and Malawi. So I'm not so familiar with the question that you had, but we do know that the small pelagics, whether they are from the African Great Lakes, from the Equatorial Lake Malawi, or from the coast, this is the very nutritious, kind of fatty, small fish, and they are smoked and they are transported all over into the landlocked countries as well. I don't know if they lose in nutritional value as they are, it depends on the shelf life, I guess, but I don't know if you have any.
We're actually doing a shelf life study. It's underway now because it's a 6-month study, so we're looking at shelf life, and I've heard that it's very stable for the small pelagic when they're dried properly. So
it depends on the nutrient, but largely they are stable. So if you have some of the water soluble nutrients, like the B vitamins, for example, you may lose that. But it's still by far, what we want to do is get fish into the mouths of vulnerable people. So even if there are some of those losses, and the Fish Innovation Lab does work on aquaculture and, like you said, fish farming.
Yeah.
So you can look on the website. There are several projects that are doing aquaculture to increase production.
And when I started this project, I actually had to learn what was the difference in fishing and aquaculture, because I didn't know. So aquaculture is just like agriculture. It's when you're actually fish farming. So
I just comment on that though. I feel like in Africa, the most affordable fish is the dried small pelagics, and fish that's cultured by aquaculture, even though you can do it in many places, is not as affordable. So one thing that the Fish Innovation Lab is looking at, how can we make aquaculture more affordable? And one example is integrated agriculture, where if a household maybe have a rice paddy, for example, how can you introduce fish there? So as a way to integrate it and make it more affordable at the household level.
Yeah, it's a cool idea. And the small pelagics are also the more sustainable fish as compared to the big ones.
well, thank you all. We're at 12 o'clock exactly, so really appreciate your time. And here's my applause to you. So thank you.